Okay, this afternoon we're going to focus a little bit more on the whole system, and I'm just going to talk for a few minutes about what we in the Centre see as a good practice system with systemic features. And then Nick is going to interview two of our partners, people from North Yorkshire and people from Telford, who've been working with us this year to find out their experience of how it works. Okay, I'm only going to make a few points, talk for about 10 minutes and give you a couple of case examples. But I'm supposed to tell you a bit about myself. I've worked for 40 years in this wonderful business of ours, and I've been an assistant director 3 or 4 times. I think I only did the job, or practice leader as we now call them, I think I only did the job really well the last time, and luckily Ofsted agreed with me about that. And I think that was something about growing confidence about what's important and what's not important, something about a lot of learning that I got from Hackney, and some of the themes you might hear me talk about in terms of the system, Isabel's already spoken about, and I think that's because when I worked in Hackney, Isabel and the team there gave me a lot of courage to say we don't have to do it the way we've always done it. And I was interested to hear this morning's speakers. I was thinking about small differences that make important changes. So the first thing I think, if I was an Ofsted inspector going in, or if I was anybody going into a local authority and saying what's important in a children's social care, children's social work department, I would say it's that everybody at every level is interested, fascinated, wants to know what's happening on the front line, wants to talk about families. The only reason, that we've got managers, performance, business analysts, commissioners, the rest of it, we're all here to support the front line. If there was no need for practice on the front line, there'd be no need for the rest of us as well. And so it's really important that our focus remains on the front line. And as you go up the hierarchy in the organisation, you get increasingly distracted by other people who tell you that their agenda is very important. And so you end up sitting in the digital strategy meeting or going to the corporate planning half day or whatever. And it's really important, I think, that leaders, managers, supervisors all focus on the front line and are really interested about what's happening and what social workers and other practitioners at that level are doing. A core belief, a model of change is also really important, and we've heard a lot about systemic practice. It goes without saying really that has been really important for us across the 3 boroughs in terms of agreeing a common way of working. When we first got together, the 3 boroughs, we spent quite a lot of time comparing and contrasting everything that we did. And in family services, the social work services, we talked a lot about should we all have this structure or should we all have that structure. And in the end, we thought we better stop arguing about structures. Why don't we just have a common approach, a common model, a common way of working with families? And that's the point really when we went systemic. Skilled and knowledgeable practitioners. There's been some interesting reflections, I thought, today on what is an expert. I think social workers and other workers in social care departments are experts. I think there's a lot of areas where we have expertise that other disciplines don't have. And I think, again, one of the most important things in a practice system is that expertise continues to develop, that you continue to be challenged, interested, learn. I suppose we're at the point in our 3 boroughs at the moment where everybody's had year 1 of training, some people are getting year 2, systemic practice. We've got some embedding workshops which are going really well. Embedding workshops doesn't make it sound as interesting as they are, but a couple of the clinicians are talking about therapeutic letters, concepts of safe uncertainty and so on, and reminding people. But I still think we need to think a little bit more about how we keep that going, because there was a lot of excitement during the focus on practice years, as we call them, and we need to keep that going. So to keep developing your expertise is really important. Relationships. it's just everything, isn't it? You know, the relationships between the social workers and the families, between the social workers and the supervisors the heads of service ourselves as leaders. It's the most important part of the work, and I still struggle with, given that we know how important the strong relationship is with the family, I still struggle that most of the systems in our country have built-in breaks. You have an assessment service, a CP service, a looked after children service, a leaving care service. In Kensington and Chelsea recently, we've even got rid of the leaving care service, having got rid of or never established all the other breaks. And I still believe that we need to crack that constant structural changing of relationships if we're going to be a more effective service. I'm just going to give a case example really about the importance of relationships, and it links a bit with time to do the work. It's one of two case examples I'm going to give of work that I see in our 3 boroughs, which I think gives you an example of a systemic practice system. This was a family where there was a very violent man in prison who was due to come out. His partner and their 2 children, we were, in case, it was when I was the Family Services Director, and there were case discussions about whether to go to court because there were serious and real concerns that the father, when he returned to the family, would continue to be violent. And we were very close to going to court, and at that time I was popping in and out of legal planning meetings, so we had quite an interesting discussion. And the reason we didn't go to court, and that was because the social worker helped with the aid of the clinician, said that they would build a relationship with the man while he was in prison, which happened, and the clinician had a family meeting to look at the violence within the context. There were, without going into the detail, there were reasons why the mother was not able to protect the children or to break the relationship with her husband. So we knew he would come back. The clinician very skillfully engaged the whole family, the extended family. Everybody was part of the work to help this man control his behaviour, which he wanted to do to a certain extent. Anyway, it was a very successful piece of work, but it took an enormous amount of time, and it took a huge investment in building the relationship and understanding the violence within the context of the family and within in a relational context. I'm looking at Nick because I practiced this with him because of the systemic bit, and he's nodding, so I think I've got it okay. You know, I'm not a trained systemic family therapist. Feedback, what happened next? We've done some work recently with the Behavioural Insights team, who used to be known as the Nudge Unit, who, you know, if we didn't know it already, have convinced us that unless you know the impact of your decisions, you either go on making the same decisions, which might not be the right decisions, or well, you make them in an ignorant way, really, much as the court does. When you think every judge makes a decision, they never know what happens to the family afterwards. Our business is predicting the future. That's what we're doing all the time. And why we think we can predict the future without knowing what happens as a consequence of our decisions is fascinating, really, because in any other field you wouldn't do that. And in many of our, because of some of our structures and because of the way we work, we haven't always got that feedback loop. But it's one of the things that we've tried to encourage within systemic framework. Time to do the work, it's bloody obvious, isn't it? But still we don't help our practitioners find the time to do a decent piece of work. You cannot effect change without building a strong relationship with the family, or not lasting or significant change. And yet we still expect people to work with large numbers of families at any one time and not to be able to devote time. And again, our ambition at the beginning of the Focus on Practice is that we would get caseloads down to 6 or 8 families. We haven't done that. We need to keep working at it. It's not an embarrassment not to be busy. It's something to be proud of if we're working with small numbers of families and can make a difference. And we know that because in every local authority, the EduCare teams, all the MST teams, multi-systemic treatment teams, whatever, all those boutique projects, as Isabel used to call them, they all work with small numbers of families, don't they? And they often make a difference because of that. But we've still not cracked that with social work services. A good balance between the activities that matter and those that don't. And that's true for all of us at all levels. What we have tried to do, and I think what you would see in a good practice system, is a common agreement about what's important, what will make a difference to the families that we work with, and what is just either fluff or having to fill in forms because somebody else says there needs to be a form, or having to go to meetings, back to the digital strategy and the corporate plan. You know, we've got to be stricter about spending our time on what's important. And I suppose I'll skip to the last one with that in mind. You know, please stop writing everything down all the time. Just try and limit the amount you write down. Try and spend more time thinking and talking. We've introduced case summaries, we've done lots of different things, but still there's pages and pages of words about families that probably nobody ever looks at again. I'm not saying it's not useful some of the time, of course it is, of course we want good assessments, but we write, as a profession, we spend far too much time writing everything down, in my view. I always quote this, and I'll quote it again, of somebody who told me about a youth offending team where an inexperienced worker was spending time with a very angry young man who was talking about his anger and how he couldn't control it, and she was with him for about 45 minutes an hour. She went back into the team room, quite distressed, said, "I've listened to this boy talk, I don't really know what to do, you know, he's going to burst soon." And her manager said, "Go and write it down. You know, that will manage the risk for you, won't it?" There is no single story. All of you who've been on Nick's courses will have seen the TED talk by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, where she's an author, and she talks about the different stories. And I think we've heard some good stories today, actually, but we have also heard that there is no single story, that there are multiple views about how we work with families, and the importance of sharing those and arguing through in an inquisitorial way, being curious and not always saying there's a right and a wrong, because there often isn't. I'm just going to finish on, we have a thing in the 3 boroughs called Practice Week, where we go out and about and observe, and the last time I was on Practice Week a few months ago, I was very lucky to be able to observe, well, there was lots of things going on actually. There was a social worker who was working with her foster carer and her adult daughter, and she was had been working. They have a 15-year-old, 16-year-old teenager living with them. The placement's very rocky, and that the girl who was living with them has had a very distressing, traumatic past before she came into care. And we've got this equipment with the cameras, so we've got a room where the social worker was talking to the foster carer and her adult daughter, and then we had another room where we had the reflecting team, which in this case was 2 of our therapists, 2 of our clinicians, and a couple of social workers, I think one is in the room, who were, the social workers were on the Year 2 systemic practice, and they were learning, and the 2 clinicians were advising the social worker in the room with the foster carer, but also talking to the 2 social workers who were in the reflecting team in order that they could develop their learning. And so the social worker had, the foster carer and the daughter adored the social worker. They thought she was brilliant. She'd always been really directive with them. And she was trying to change the relationship so that she wasn't always the one that they relied on, and they could work with the girl using their own skills, their own expertise that they brought, not just depending on the social worker to tell them what to do. And so there was all this going on. Every now and then the phone would ring, and the social worker would say, pick it up, and then she'd answer it. She'd hear what the clinician said, and then she'd talk to the foster care and the adult. And then they switched rooms, the foster care and the adult go into the other room, and the reflecting team do some reflections, I was invited to join in reflections. I was told by one of the clinicians I made a very good reflection, so I was very pleased with myself. And the foster carer and her adult daughter watched what went on, and then they switched again, and they talked about what they'd heard and what they'd seen and how it would help change their behaviour. So it's not like, a big dramatic story to tell, but I came away feeling so proud that in our 3 boroughs there was this sophisticated piece of work going on. There was a lot of time being spent, as well as the work with the foster carer in order to maintain that placement. There were 2 social workers who were learning from the clinicians, developing their thinking, approaching things, in great detail and with great sophistication and purpose. And I suppose when you see things like that, you think, okay, this is great, this business of ours, isn't it? And social work, can be this very purposeful and intensive stuff. It doesn't have to be just coordinating and referring on and filling in forms. And the more we do of that, the better. And I think in any systemic practice framework system that you will see much more of that kind of behaviour and less of the form filling. So that's my introduction to the work that Nick is going to do with North Yorkshire and Telford in saying how we as the centre have worked with them to try and help them improve their practice systems.
What we thought was that you might want to hear from some of the people that are working in the authorities that we're working with directly. You might want to hear from them directly what the experience has been like. So I've invited them to sit here. They're all going to sit down and take a mic, and I'm just going to ask them a few questions. And once we've done that, at the end of the afternoon, you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions too. Okay, this one's on. Okay, before I get into asking questions, do you just want to say who you all are and where you're from?
My name's Nick Benison. I'm Service Delivery Manager for Child Protection in Telford.
I'm Janice Nicholson and I'm the Group Manager for No Wrong Door in North Yorkshire County Council.
Barbara Marigold, I'm a Divisional Manager for the Prevention Service, which is the early intervention side of Children and Family Service.
I'm Julie Firth and I'm Head of Service for the Early Help Offer.
I'm Rebecca Hill and I'm the Practice Supervisor on the Multi-Agency Screening Team for North Yorkshire.
Hi, I'm Vicky Metheringham. I'm Head of Safeguarding and Looks After Children in North Yorkshire.
Hello, James Lee, Team Manager for the Northumberland Social Work Team.
Brilliant, thank you. A big representation from North Yorkshire. Okay, so this question starts for all of you. You've been working with us for 4 or 5 months now. You're each on a different course, and you've probably done one of the leadership courses is finished, and the supervision course is coming towards an end. What difference has doing the courses made to your day-to-day practice in your authorities?
I think for Telford, one of the most important things is the fact that we've had a train ride down as a senior management group together. Because coming back to Clare's point, it's about having time to think and having time to reflect without all the pressures in terms of the day-to-day pressures, and that's been actually really, really helpful for us. And also some of the conversations that we've had during the sessions with Nick and with Clare around things like risk and how risk gets managed, how we can work better, how the organisation can work better in terms of outcomes for children, has been really challenging at times and has made us really think. So the train ride back from London to Telford has also been really interesting in terms of thinking about how we can start improving our services for the children that are in Telford that we have worries about, and that's actually been really, really helpful. It's been really challenging at times, as I'm from child protection, and some of the things that we've talked about is about going into some of the unknowns and sort of challenges that we've had in terms of how we manage risk, in terms of the frameworks that we have, the statutory frameworks that we have, and thinking about things a bit differently in terms of how we manage risk together, how we support social workers in doing that, how managers support it. The other important thing, really important thing for us all has been the fact that it has been something that has been put in place so the director of our service has been involved. That has really, really helped in how we've modelled our service, because we've put things like early help together with safeguarding, rather than it's child protection over here, it's early help over here, and never the twain shall meet, because we're doing different things. We're actually thinking about putting things in place where we're all dealing with the same children, we all have worries about the same children, and it's about how we work together to try and improve their lot. So I'm hogging the mic a bit there.
For me, I think it's really important for us to think about how the way that we use language and the way that we communicate has a real impact on the way that a conversation or an episode can go. So for me, I think it's about thinking differently about the way I talk to people, and I don't get it right all the time. And I was telling somebody earlier on about an example of when I didn't do it yesterday, but what I'm going to do about it. So I think it's about how you start looking at the way you work yourself, where you've come from, what things impact on you, and then the way that informs the way that you communicate, both with your colleagues, with senior managers and those staff that you're working with, and how that can hopefully be sort of remodelled then into the practice with families, which is the most important thing.
I think it's given, for North Yorkshire, we've been part of the leadership team, and so it's given us time to, one, look at our own relationships and how we work together, particularly when we're looking at early intervention as well as child protection, and then opportunities to reflect of how we work with the teams and how we're going to be able to take this forward in North Yorkshire.
You can keep going on, so whoever would like to contribute.
Well, I'll just be brief, but like Nick from Telford, it's been just fantastic to have a day out and some space to think and to learn new things, which has been wonderful. But it's also for us helped us to understand that in North Yorkshire we need a narrative around our practice. And we need to articulate that narrative around what our beliefs and values are that shape the work we do with children.
One of the things that we've been talking about from the course as well has really helped us to think of, we've noticed that we've always thought of things in a linear perspective, and this course helped us to think of things more circular in the work that we do.
I'm at risk of repeating here. I think just the importance of how I conduct myself. I've spent a lot of time thinking about my own, the way that I handle conversations, the use of language and its importance in developing relationships. I think in particular working with our multi-agency partners in managing really risky adolescent behaviours and the use of questions and how those meetings are conducted has been a real tribute as a result of my involvement on the programme.
I've almost ended up with 2 microphones, so it must be my turn. In a sense, there's so much when you think about it over the last year, and I think meeting colleagues from other teams in other parts of the country is really helpful, and we have a lot in common and we have some differences, and it's really interesting to have an opportunity to explore that. The anxiety around writing assignments after many years of not doing so, I could probably talk for a long time on that. But also, somehow it's given us a vocabulary to have conversations that I think over 30 years of practice I've had some awareness of, but I've not been sure how to go about those conversations. And I include social graces in that, and I include some of the things about asking awkward or difficult or challenging questions, but seeking permission or offering a context around it. So I think the confidence to go back to my team and try and share that with them, to empower them to do that with the families, is really what we're trying to do. That working with will get us far better outcomes than doing to. I think it's given us a structure to kind of base it around that.
Lovely, thank you. And we don't have to answer in turn to this one in a linear way. Absolutely. Whoever might have an answer. What do you think in your authorities will be or are the biggest challenges to doing things differently? So you've done this learning on the courses, and we talked a little bit today about learning on a course is one thing, but we're coming to the end of those courses, and you want to embed some of these ideas in your practice, what are the challenges that you're going to come across, or that you've already come across, and how do you think you might meet those? Who wants to have a go?
I think one of the challenges may be getting everybody to talk in the same language, to have that narrative as a whole local authority. It's not easy. There's a resource and a cost to that, so I think that's one of the challenges. But just from the meetings that we've had in North Yorkshire with our practitioners that are on the practice course and those on the supervisor course, the passion and the commitment and the willingness to take this on and really see the value of it really heartens me, and I think that is the best starting point that we've got, really.
And just to add to that, we met with all of colleagues within North Yorkshire that are on the programme so far on Monday, took their feedback, your views around the course, and it was universally just so positive, as Janice has said. And we've made a commitment that we will all come together again in February once the social work practitioners have finished their course, and look at how we're going to take forward some of the themes. And I know Nick and Clare are coming up to North Yorkshire at the end of this month to allow us to develop our own practice framework. So despite North Yorkshire being enormous, the commitment's there, the drive and the ambition's there, and I think everybody is just so positive, and it's impacted on everybody just far more than anybody thought it was going to do.
I think the day-to-day, just being able to maintain the focus while all the day-to-day stuff is going on is the difficulty, I think, and also making sure that that we have a programme in place where everybody is being trained, and we have a rolling programme of that to make sure that it's being embedded, and people have the time. Going back to what Clare was talking about, people have the time in terms of social workers and managers to basically ensure that this is happening across the board. That's really, really important for us, and that's something that that's taken up an awful lot of our conversation in terms of trying to move away from where everyone's got to write things down in triplicate to get what they need to done for children, to a point where people have much more time focused on working with families.
Thank you. And just a couple more questions. If you could look kind of 6 months, a year into the future, what are the things that you would be seeing in terms of practice in your authorities that would tell you that this has been worthwhile?
The language that people use about children and families would be different, and that would be the biggest and most important thing in terms of how, and it's not just about social workers' language, it's everybody's language all the way through, and including partner agencies, and I think that's going to be the biggest thing. There's all the other performance stuff around bringing LAC figures down and CP figures and all that sort of stuff, but the biggest issue the biggest thing for us is about people talking about families and children in a different way.
I think one of the things that has struck me more recently is checking out with people much more, both checking out with staff and checking out with families, and I think an indication will be how staff and families are telling us, rather than us being the font of all knowledge. When we've talked about changing that dynamic, in 12 months' time, what are they going to say about the experience and how it's changed?
I would hope that we've got a plan, that we're working through the plan, that we've got training on a rolling basis, but as a starting point, so that we understand that just starts the embedding of the practice, and that we're learning from each other and moving that experience forward, so that in a year's time you can hear people talking about it, you hear the language change, you see the excitement.
And less bureaucracy, less processes, less panels. You wouldn't need to check out all the time. That decision making is okay, because you'd have more confidence. And we're starting to see some of that already. Already we've stood down one of our weekly panels. It's called something entirely different, and it's around talking with colleagues to make decisions rather than expecting laborious pieces of paper to be submitted and so forth.
Thank you. And a last question. What advice would you give to practitioners here, to managers here, to senior managers here from other authorities who may be thinking about making some changes, or maybe thinking about integrating systemic ideas into practice, or working with the Centre for Systemic Social Work? what advice would you give them, or what feedback would you give them from your experiences?
I think one of the things I was a bit concerned about at the beginning was, we're trained in restorative practice, we're trained in science of safety. Is this just going to be another thing? But it absolutely underpins all of those all of those methodologies. So it's not an exclusive thing. It's something that sits across everything that you do. So I found that really really useful to find out.
The input has been really high quality. We've looked forward to coming. We've enjoyed it. We've discussed it on the train. Just like Telford, it's bounced off each other. So in terms of learning and creating an energy, it's been a fantastic experience. It really has.
And I think the coherence that we've developed as a result of working so much more closely together has been phenomenal. Actually, we're already talking the same language. Our relationships are much stronger when we're looking at really complex, tricky cases. I think the way in which we come together now to consider those risks are much different to how they would have been before. And I think as authorities start to think about embracing these thoughts, if you feel the passion and drive within your authority that we've already got, it is just such a fantastic feeling.
Thank you all very much. And just a last opportunity, if there's anything else that you'd like to say that I haven't asked you, or that you just want an opportunity to say to everyone while you're sitting on this stage.
Don't be daunted by the reading.
I was.
Okay, thank you all very much.